Welcome to Adobe Photoshop. As you can see, this is the latest version available on the Adobe Creative Cloud. Updates to the software are free each year for those who have a subscription to the Adobe Creative Cloud. For those students who do not have an Adobe subscription, I get asked this question a lot. Can I use older versions of the software for this class? And my short answer is absolutely. There is no reason that having software that's a little older should stop you from creating wonderful design work and projects. The next few lessons of this course are for those who are brand new to Photoshop, or maybe you've only opened it a few times and played around with it, or those who want to start at the very basic level. For those already a little comfortable with the basic interface and tools of Photoshop, feel free to move through these lessons quickly or skip them. There are going to be some really awesome up-to-date tools that may not be available to you if you have older versions, and I'll try to mention those throughout this course, what those tools might be. All versions of Photoshop have the same basic elements, so let's go ahead and get started by opening up a new document and learning those basic tools. I'm going to click on Create New in the dashboard, and this is going to be a little bit of a newer dashboard. Before, you would just have a blank window if you have an older version of Photoshop. Things at this point are going to look a little different for you, but it's all going to be the same. We're just going to create a new document, or you're just going to go to File, New, and let's just create a basic document. If you have an older version of Photoshop, you'll be able to just have kind of these simple options. The newer versions have some kind of pre-made template sizes where you can go do photo sizes, print sizes, even web sizes. So it's kind of nice to have these built-in templates or built-in sizes that you can do. So let's do something really simple. Let's do a very simple Instagram post. So let's go ahead and type in 1000 by 1000 pixels. So we have 1000 in width and 1000 in height. And orientation is not going to matter since it's going to be a square. And we're going to do this in pixel since it's a digital item. We're going to do this in RGB color mode, but we can always switch that to CMYK if we wanted to make a print document. But this is going to be a web Instagram project, and we're going to do just a white background. And everything kind of leave the same. Let's go ahead and create it. We're creating a very simple Instagram post to kind of experiment with. So every version of Photoshop is going to have some basic elements. And that's going to be your toolbar. That's going to be right here on the left. That's this little guy which you can kind of move around. There's these little double arrows right here you can click and collapse it to 2 columns if you like a more compact view. So this is really, Photoshop is incredibly customizable, which we're going to find out in a moment. So this is your toolbar. We're going to be able to cut objects out. You're going to be able to crop. You have the paint bucket tool. A lot of your basic tools that you're used to using and thinking about when you think about Photoshop are accessed right here on your toolbar. To the right, you're going to have what's called panels. And these panels are also fully customizable. If there's a specific panel you don't think you're going to use, you could just drag this tab out and be able to close it down. And you can rearrange where they are, so you can actually bring these into this other little column and have quick little pullouts. And so these are totally customizable. So one thing I want to do with you guys to make sure we kind of have some similar tools available so our screens don't look exactly the same, but they look pretty close. We're going to go up to Window on the top, and we're going to arrange our workspace. So we're going to go down to the Workspace option, and we're going to make sure it's on Essentials. So this is going to be your default mode for Photoshop. That's what we're going to start with. And I'm going to try to go over all the panels and tools you're going to need as a graphic designer, because Photoshop is meant for graphic design, but also photo editing and a ton of other things. So we're going to focus mostly on graphic design panels that are useful for the projects we're going to be doing. So also, let's make sure we reset Essentials. So if you already are on Essentials, make sure you reset it, and it's going to all bring it back to default. And it'll vary depending on what version of Photoshop you are in. So there's certain things you're not going to use very much. So this Learn thing is a kind of a new panel in the newer version of Photoshop. We're not going to need that. You just want to try to streamline and simplify your panels on the right so you don't have all these windows you're never going to use. You really want to focus on the ones you're going to use the most as a graphic designer. And I'm going to go over a couple of those here quickly. So your Layers panel is going to be pretty essential. Here's our Layers panel. I'm going to go ahead and drag it out so you can see. You're going to use layers more than any other panel in our project. So definitely Layers is a very important one. We'll find out about channels a little bit later, but I like to go ahead and keep that. Paths as well. So if you have these, just go ahead and keep those the way they are. And there's certain ones like libraries we're not going to use quite right away, so we're just going to kind of simplify. So we have the adjustments panel. We of course have our color panel. This is how we're going to be selecting our color. And we have swatches, which we're going to be able to select our swatches. So those are all very important. Gradients are very important for a designer. We're going to use lots of gradients as well in the course. And patterns, we can go ahead and drag that out and simplify. So we're missing a lot of really good essential panels. How do we call out a panel that we're not seeing on the right? Or let's say we accidentally deleted one. Oops, didn't mean to do that. How do I get all this back up? To recall any panel that's available, you can go up right here to Window, and these are all panels right here in your Windows tab. So you can call up any panel that you want. So if you're working in typography, the character panel is pretty important because it helps us with typography and size. So as a graphic designer, these character and paragraph panels are very important. So I'm going to go ahead and drag those in very prominent positions, and you don't have to put them in the same places that I do. Of course, you can go ahead and expand out your panel area and make it a more wide or more narrow. All of this is fully customizable. So let's find some other very important panels to have around for a graphic designer. Character styles, we're going to use that a little bit later in the course. So let's go ahead and make sure character styles panel is open. We could drag that maybe next to the character option. Also, none of this has to be perfect. Don't feel like you have to match whatever I have perfectly, but just make sure you have your layers panel, make sure you have your color panel, and paragraph and character panels. And also most recently, with new updates to Adobe Photoshop, the properties panel has been kind of where they've been putting a lot of options for people. So here's our properties panel, and it's going to have a lot of things with guides, grids, all sorts of things. So we're going to keep that properties panel nearby. So that's how you kind of work with panels and kind of how you rearrange them, and you're going to find out which ones are going to be most beneficial to you as a graphic designer as you do more and more projects. So you have your toolbar to the left. We're going to slowly create kind of this Instagram project, and we're going to use about half these tools just to kind of introduce them so you can get used to your toolbar, you get used to all your options on the right. And there's even more additional photo editing options. You probably wonder how people do all those really cool photo editing techniques, and most of those are going to be found in your image drop down. And we're going to get to that in future projects. But for right now, let's focus on the toolbar and the panels and get used to the basics of creating simple shapes, typography, and do a simple Instagram post. So let's create some basic shapes. So I'm over here in our marquee selection tool. Right here, it's going to look just like this little dotted square. We're going to click and hold, and we're going to be able to get options. And you can always know if there's sub options or a drop-down menu. If you click and hold, if you see that little arrow down at the bottom of the icon, we know if we click and hold, we'll be able to have access to more additional options. So let's go ahead and just create a simple circle, and I'm just going to click and drag. And for those who have older versions of Photoshop, you'll have to hold down the Shift button and drag if you want to create a perfect circle. If you don't want to create a perfect circle and you want to create an oval, don't hold down the Shift button, and you can have more control over your selection. It doesn't scale, what they call scaling dimensionally. But we want to create a perfect circle. We want it to scale dimensionally. So I'm just going to hold down that Shift button and drag. So anytime you see kind of this dotted line, that means it's a selection. It's not an object yet. So let's fill this selection with a color. So we're going to get that trusty paint bucket tool, which you might have used before. And then we can go down to our little color options here. I'm going to go down and select on this top swatch just a really bright color, maybe just select green, and I just double clicked on it, and you can kind of change the color however you like. So we're going to select green. We have our paint bucket tool selected, and we have kind of this what's going on sign. So kind of a no, you're not going to be able to do it. Could not use the paint bucket because no layers are selected. Let's talk about layers. So let's go ahead and drag out our very important layers panel, and let's go ahead and create a layer. So we're going to go down here to this addition icon. It looks a little different in different versions of Photoshop, but it's create a new layer. And here's our layer. And let's go ahead and fill in on this layer the green. So you can kind of see a preview of what's happening there with that layer. If I were to draw another circle, so I'm right back here to my ellipse tool selection, and I want to draw another circle. I'm on the same layer. Let's toggle this right here. Toggle this to orange. Going to get our paint bucket tool, fill that in. What you'll notice is this is all one kind of unit. But I'd love to have these on separate layers so I can move them behind each other and in front of each other. So let's go back in time, which how do you do that? You can use a keyboard shortcut, Command Z, and you can press Command Z, and you can go back steps in time, or you can call out your history panel. So if you don't see your history panel, just go up to Window and let's call it up. There's our history panel. Let's drag him right down here because he's pretty important. You can go back in time in your history panel to the state that you want to go to. So let's go back to where we just had a circle. Let's add a new layer. So let's go ahead, add a new layer, and let's go ahead and do that same circle and do the paint bucket tool. So now we have total control over these layers. So this one's on top, orange is on top. Let's go ahead and drag orange below, and now orange is on the bottom. So pretty simple. And when we do more complicated projects, you can have 20 different layers. So it's really good to kind of name particular layers so you can keep track of all the different layers that might be happening in your particular design piece. Let's go ahead and we have our move tool, which is the top tool up here. That's what we select when we want to be able to move particular objects around. And I'm not going to talk about shortcuts too much now because you're still learning the basics of the software, but it's really nice to learn those keyboard shortcuts. For, in this case, it's V. So if we ever want to access the move tool, we just type V in on our keyboard and we'll be able to switch to that without having to take our mouse and go all the way up to the top to select it. Learning a keyboard shortcut every once in a while is really nice to add. You speed up your workflow. So I'm just going to select this, and you'll notice by default in Photoshop that Show Transform Controls is not selected. And I'm going up and I'm just making sure that Show Transform Controls is selected. So now you'll see the transform controls for both of these objects, which I can scale together because I have them both selected. Press Enter, or I can just scale one at a time. So I can scale one at a time, and I have these nice transforming controls shown. So just make sure you have Show Transform Controls on. It's really nice to have so you can be able to have access to those transforming controls to make it bigger, smaller, and if you move out to the outside, you see that little arrow, you can even rotate the object, which comes in handy when it's not a circle. So let's delete this layer. I'm going to take this layer and drag it all the way to the trash can, and it's just going to disappear, and we're left with this one. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger, have it be the centerpiece of this particular Instagram post. So let's add some type or text to our post. What we're going to do is we're going to grab the text tool, which is right here, the type tool. We're going to go ahead and select it and click anywhere here. And we're going to go ahead and type some type. So I just typed in some very generic text. I'm going to make it a lot bigger. Let's scale it up. So live life to the max. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this character panel a little bit. Let's go ahead and every time you use a text object or you use the type tool, it's going to make it a new layer. So now I have this as a totally new layer that can be moved around just like the object, the green object behind it. So now I have two layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag our layers panel back where it belongs. I just wanted to bring that out to show you more detail. And let's go ahead and go to our character panel. So our character panel is going to be how we're going to be able to edit type. So we're going to go ahead and double click on our type. It's going to highlight. And we have two areas we can edit our text up here or edit our text over here. Just whatever you feel more comfortable with. I'm going to stick with the character panel because I can drag it out and have it in close proximity to my type. So let's pick a nice typeface. We're going to go ahead and pick ones from our particular typefaces here. Let's do a nice, simple, clean typeface. And so the newer versions of Photoshop have a nice way to help you organize typefaces and fonts, but if you don't see that, then you might have an older version of Photoshop. You'll just have to manually find your favorites, but you can star your favorites to say, I really like to use this one a lot. I'm going to star it, and then I'm going to be able to click on the star, and I'm going to be able to create my top 20 font list. So in the graphic design theory lessons, I talk about finding 20 of your most used typefaces or ones you think you could really use often. This is a great way to be able to kind of manage all those font selections, is kind of creating a favorites list. So I'm just going to toggle that off, and it's going to list all typefaces. Let's find a very simple sans serif typeface. So we're going to go up here, it says filter, all classes. We are going to do a sans serif typeface. Let's do a sans serif typeface. It's going to find only the sans serif typefaces. This is a really awesome newer feature in Photoshop. So let's see if we can't use a typeface called Open Sans. So I'm just typing it in. I'm able to bring it up. Open Sans is free on Google Fonts if you want to go ahead and download that font or find one that you like to use. You don't have to use what I use. Let's do a nice bold one. So we're going to do extra bold. And there's our typeface. We can change a couple of aspects of it. So let's first change the color. Let's go ahead and change it to white. So now it's white. And what we want to do is we want to change it to all caps. So I have kind of an all caps icon you can toggle here. There's also italics. There's also bolding. There's a couple of different options here. There's even superscript and subscript if you wanted to do any kind of, just like Microsoft Word or any other program that works with type. So I'm just doing an all caps so I can get a nice even kind of look to that. And let's make this on a couple different lines so we can make the type a little bit more high impact and bigger. So I'm just going to hold down, press enter, and it's just like any other text editing program. You're going to be able to put it on 2 lines. And let's go ahead and center align this. So you have your alignment options right up here. We're going to go ahead and center align that. It's also going to be available in your paragraph panel right here. Let's drag our paragraph panel out. That's how you're going to be able to find a lot of alignment options. I'm going to do a nice center alignment and go ahead and bring it over top and make it a bit bigger. And let's make it 3 lines so we can have it even more high impact. I'm just going to double click and be able to make it 3 lines. So in graphic design, I want to make this feel more connected as one unified headline, because right now there's huge gaps between the type and I want to tighten the spacing. Sometimes you may not. Sometimes you can have your own unique look with wide spacing, but I want to tighten this up and make it one really tight, bold typography piece. So how we're going to do that? So we're in our character panel and we have our type layer selected. We are going to close the gap between the spacing between the lines. And that's going to be called leading, and that's going to be this little icon right here with the 2 A's stacked on top of each other. Auto is really nice to have, but sometimes the gaps could be a little wide, so let's see if we can't manually find some better spacing here. So let's try 72, and with all of these options you can manually type in stuff that's not. So right now 72 looks like it's the max, but it's not. You could push that to any number you want. So let's go ahead and do 110 pixels. And let's continue to tighten that, maybe 105. There we go. That'll work for right now. And we're just going to place it right here in the circle. So this is really basic stuff, but this is mostly for people who have never really been in Photoshop before. So it's really great to go slow and to do the basic stuff first. So let's go ahead and put our windows or our panels back in here for right now. And let's see what we could do with this. Let's bring in a photo. So let me go ahead and go to pexels.com and see if I can't download a really cool photo that we can use. That looks really nice. Let's go ahead and download this one. This is by Brady Knoll. So you can download whatever you want for this exercise. It doesn't have to be this one. I'm going to teach you kind of how to bring in photos. So you can just simply drag a photo in to Photoshop and it's going to load it in. So we can kind of crop this or make it a little bit bigger by using the transform controls and dragging it out. So let's go to our layers panel because we want this on the bottom. So we're going to drag this layer all the way to the bottom. And there we go. So now we're like, oh, well, that looks kind of weird. Let's go ahead and see if we can't let some pixels in behind this green circle and make it a little bit transparent. So one thing you can do in your layers panel, you have your opacity. It's always connected to your layers panel. We could reduce the opacity so we can kind of see the woman in the background. Notice that? That kind of adds a nice vibe to it. Of course, the color is going to probably have to change now, which is no big deal. We can easily change the color. So let's change the color now that we reduced the opacity to 60%. We're going to double click. This is going to be layer styles. So we're going to be double clicking in this kind of blank area right here in our green circle layer. And it's going to call up what's called layer styles. This is how you add drop shadows, bevels, effects to your particular layers. So we're just going to do a simple color overlay. It's going to just totally change the color of that entire layer to whatever color you select. So we can maybe take our eyedropper tool and sample one of these nice light colors. We can even sample her dress. And we can also add a drop shadow as well. So this is how you add drop shadows, and we'll go over that a lot. We'll be using that a lot in this class. You can change the distance, you can make it more blurred, and you can change the opacity of your drop shadow. We'll go over layer panels a lot in future lessons. We're just kind of going over the very basics right now. So we can select both of these layers, and we can even just select one layer because we have auto select on. Whatever we click on, it will automatically select it. So now that we have auto select on, I can select this circle. I can hold down the shift button. I can select two objects at the same time. I don't have to go over here to my layers panel and highlight both like that. I can just do it right here and select it. So I can kind of move this over a little bit. And let's go ahead and crop this photo a little better. So I have our photo selected, and you'll notice when you drag a photo into Photoshop, it'll become a smart object. So what a smart object is, and you can always tell it's a smart object. I'll go ahead and show you. You can tell it's a smart object because it's got this little icon on the bottom right. So that means it's a smart object, and what that means is if I bring a photo in and it's a smart object, I can make it really big and really small, and it retains the original photo. It doesn't get changed at all. If it wasn't a smart object, then if I made the photo bigger, it would pixelate. And if I made the photo smaller, it would pixelate even worse. So smart objects are pretty nice when it comes to photos, and it does it automatically when you drag and import a photo in. So I'm just going to drag this down and just do some better cropping here. Let's really kind of bring in the woman here a little bit more. And now that we have this photo set, let's change her typography because I really want something more elegant now that she's in this nice elegant dress. So I'm going to change the typeface. So I'm just going to double click my text layer right here. I'm going to be able to go up here, or you can always go to that character panel if I want to change it, or you can change it up here. You know, it's really what you feel comfortable with. You got a lot of options of changing type. So I'm going to change it over here so the drop down box doesn't cover my little preview. And in older versions of Photoshop, you don't get the automatic preview of the type, which is kind of sad. I like being able to see the preview so I don't have to select it each time. So just a benefit to having a newer, updated version of Photoshop, but it's not a total game changer. It's just very nice to have. Let's do Railway. That's another font that's free to use from Google Fonts, so I'm just going to use that since I know you have access to it. Let's do a nice, thin, elegant typeface here. So I'm doing Railway Thin. Let's go ahead and select it off so it looks really nice. And let's highlight a word here. So what if we just highlighted Max, and we made just Max going down to weight here, or I can go down to weight here and just changing it to black. Or I can double click this and see if I can't find another script typeface that might look really nice. I found a nice script typeface that will work really well. Just highlighting Max, change that to one called Artifact, and I can make this a little bit bigger, but then it starts to kind of have issues. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to have to change the spacing or the leading between just these two lines of type. So it might be better to isolate this, or in this case, I'm just going to go to Edit, Cut, or I can do a little shortcut and do Command X Cut, whatever works for you. And I'm going to just do a Command V or go up to Edit, Paste, whatever you feel comfortable with. All I'm doing is just pasting that back in. And I'm going to get our Type tool. I'm going to go ahead and click here and then paste. Just do a Command V. I'm going to be able to paste that same type in there. I'm going to make it bigger. So I'm just separating it on two lines just so I can have more control, maybe even overlap the type a little bit. I just feel like I have more control over it. Instead of keeping it all one big text box, I have this as a text box and this as a text box, and I can just click and move these around. So let's say I want to add a nice drop shadow to this Max. I'm just trying to find a way to kind of tuck these letters in nicely like a puzzle piece. And I'm going to double click to do our layer styles. We're going to double click in this blank area of Max. Bring out our layer styles panel and so add a little bit of a drop size. It's going to be a very sharp shadow. You can actually bring a bigger distance here, make it more dramatic, and do it very soft. So I'm just doing a 15, maybe even a 12% opacity, so it's not very strong. If you're to do strong drop shadows, it does kind of cheapen the effect and make it look a little dated. So whenever I use drop shadows, unless I really need a shadow to show up, I try to use nice subtle drop shadows. So let's say we want to add a little bit of an angle to all this. I'm going to select our max, going to hold down shift, select our other type, just continuing to hold down shift, and I'm going to select our little circle. So we have these 3 layers selected. They're kind of all one unit now. All I'm going to do is going to go up to our transform controls and just move out to the corner a little bit further until I see this little rotate transform option, and I'm just going to kind of rotate all of this a little bit to kind of make it angled, and just going to go ahead and position it. And we could also make it smaller, whatever you want to do, just kind of showing you lots of different options you have here in Photoshop. So we can make this max come out of the circle so it feels more layered. So you kind of have your M, the points of the M coming out, kind of gives it a nice layered look like it's breaking the mold. And we can even have an opportunity to add a button here or some other type of kind of text box there if we wanted to. But let's go ahead and leave this project as is. There's so much more to study, but we've gotten to study layers. We've gotten to look at the character and type tools. We've got to create a circle. We've got to learn how to bring in a photo. We're just getting comfortable with the very, very basics of Photoshop. We're going to create some really awesome projects in the next couple sections of this class. But this was really a basic introduction. We got our dashboard set up. We're ready to do some much more complicated stuff, especially with photo editing. I know you guys are looking forward to really doing some awesome photo editing, and we're going to be that is the magic of Photoshop right there, is the photo editing abilities. And as a graphic designer, I use Photoshop mostly for editing photos. And for layout, I usually save that for Adobe InDesign, but with social media and digital graphics, I do like to do some layout design in Photoshop. So we're going to be doing some digital graphics. We have a YouTube thumbnail we're going to do as well, and I look forward to doing those more intermediate projects here soon.